In this video, we are going to talk about Darwin's theory of evolution and some of the misconceptions about evolution. Okay, so we are now on the third part of the evolution series. Okay, so the specific learning outcomes are number one, to understand Darwin's theory of evolution, and number two, to clarify misconceptions about the theory of evolution. The first thing that you need to know is the voyage of the Beagle. Okay, this is one of the most significant expeditions in the field of biology. Okay, when we say voyage of the Beagle, it's not really a sail and a beagle or a dog. It's more of the journey of Charles Darwin. Okay, so Charles Darwin embarked on this 5-year journey in 1831, and it was during this time that he made observations and collected data that would lead him to his theory of evolution by natural selection. One of the primary reasons of the voyage was to chart the poorly known stretches of South America's coastline. It means to map out or make a detailed record of the parts of the coastlines that were not well known or documented at the time. However, Darwin also observed and collected thousands of plants and animals during the voyage. He noted the special features that allowed the organisms to survive in diverse or different environments. So he associated the species of plants and animals in South America's temperate and tropical regions as more closely related than species of the temperate regions of Europe. Darwin also found fossils in South America that resembled living species in the same region. So this discovery led him to read Lyell's principle of geology. So Lyell's principle of geology proposed that natural processes that operate in the present have also operated in the past. So this was in the first part of the video. So this idea helped Darwin better understand how the fossils he discovered had come to be in South America. Now, during the voyage, Darwin also observed fossils of aquatic organisms. He discovered this in Andes, so it's a mountain region. He accounted for their presence through the many earthquakes that may have happened, which affirmed his learning from Lyell. Finally, the voyage of the Beagle reached the Galapagos Islands where Darwin observed finches. Okay, so this is a type of bird. So the pinches eventually became the basis for his theory of evolution. He observed that there were finches unique to this island, while others resembled the mainland species. So this helped him hypothesize that the Galapagos Islands was colonized by species from the mainland South America and then diversified because of the surroundings there, giving rise to different species on different islands. Okay, now let's talk about the observations of the finches. Darwin's observation of the finches in Galapagos Islands was particularly significant because it allowed him to develop his theory of adaptation and natural selection. He noticed that the difference in beak types and behaviors were adapted to the specific food available on each island. So this led him to the idea of natural selection, which explains how individuals with inherited traits or organisms with high fitness that allow them to survive and reproduce in a particular environment will be more likely to pass on those traits to their offsprings. So at first, Darwin was not confident about his ideas until Alfred Wallace, who worked in the Malayan archipelago. Alfred Wallace sent him his manuscript that contained the same hypothesis of natural selection. This prompted Darwin to publish his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection, which became a groundbreaking work in the field of evolutionary biology. So Darwin's understanding of natural selection led him to develop the idea of descent with modification. So if you watched the first video, we said that descent with modification is the old term for evolution. So descent with modification suggests that species evolve over time through the accumulation of small changes that provide advantages in their environment. Okay, now let's talk about Darwin's book. So Darwin presented several observations that led him to propose his theory of evolution. He observed nature and noted the unity of life. So he believed that all organisms descended from a common ancestor. This means that all living organisms are related to each other in some way. Secondly, Darwin observed the diversity of life and believed that this was caused by descent with modification. So this means that organisms change over time and develop new traits that help them survive in their environment. The third observation that Darwin made was match between organisms and their environment. So he believed that this match was created by descent with modification through natural selection. Now, it's again interesting to note that Darwin didn't use the word evolution in his book. Okay? Instead, he used the term descent with modification to describe how species change over time. Lastly, Darwin viewed the history of life as a tree rather than a ladder as proposed by Lamarck. This means that all living organisms have a common ancestor and have branched out into different species over time. Okay? Now let's talk about the two types of selection in evolution: the artificial selection and the natural selection. Artificial evolution is the process of selecting and breeding animals and plants over many generations to achieve modifications desired by human beings. So this is commonly used in agriculture and livestock farming. Farmers choose which organisms will be used for breeding depending on the traits they want to improve. Let's say they want to improve the resistance to temperature changes. Okay, so this results in the production of crops, livestock, and even pets that resemble their wild ancestors, but with traits that have been selectively bred by humans. So, for example, they breed dogs, right? Like pugs. So, some breeders they change the size, temperament, and coat color to create different breeds. So, this type of evolution is faster than the natural selection, but it follows the same principle. The favorable traits will become more frequent in population, while less favorable traits will diminish. Another example is farmers breeding crops with desirable traits, such as high yield, resistance to pests, diseases, or better taste. So those are all artificial. Next, we have the natural selection. It is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals based on their heritable traits. It is the process by which organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and produce more offspring. So we have talked about this a lot of time. Okay? So as a result, the compatibility of organisms with their environment is increased. Now, if they change their environment or they move to another environment, this may cause to give rise to a new species, depending on the traits that will be favored by the new environment. So if you remember the birds in the second video, the birds with a short beak changed over time because the flower is deep. So they develop long beaks. Now, if they migrated or changed their environment where long beaks are not suitable for living, they will adapt and change their features over time. Okay, again, it's a gradual thing. Another example of natural selection is the development of antibiotic resistant bacteria. So, if you overuse antibiotics, the bacteria will survive and reproduce and become resistant do antibiotics. That's why you don't take antibiotics unless prescribed by your doctor. Now let's talk about the misconceptions about evolution. Number one is evolution is just a theory and not a fact. In science, remember, a theory is not a guess or a speculation, but it is an explanation that is supported by vast amount of evidence. Now, the theory of evolution is well supported and thoroughly tested explanation of how life on Earth has changed over time. So it is a fact. Number two, evolution is just random chance or a random process, which means that any traits can appear at any time. While mutations are random, natural selection is not. Okay? Natural selection is a non-random process that favors certain traits over others based on their fitness in the given environment. Again, survival of the fittest. So whatever trait is useful for you at a certain environment, that will be the one that will be passed on your offsprings. Number three, evolution violates the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that the amount of disorder or entropy in a closed system will always increase over time. However, remember that Earth is not a closed system. The sun provides a constant input of energy, allowing for the increase in complexity and order in living organisms. Okay? So it does not violate the second law of thermodynamics. Number four, evolution is just survival of the fittest. Why is it a misconception? While survival of the fittest is part of evolution, it is not the only factor. Evolution, if you remember, also includes genetic drift, gene flow, and mutation, which can all contribute to changes in populations over time. Next, humans evolved from monkeys. So this is very popular, especially to kids. So humans did not evolve from monkeys, but rather they share a common ancestor within them. Remember what Darwin observed? Human life is like a tree, or life is like a tree. Next, misconception number six. Evolution is a linear process that always leads to more advanced species. You must know that evolution is not a linear process, and there's no such thing as more advanced species. Again, organisms evolve to fit their specific environment. If their environment is suitable, then there will be no change. Okay? And of course, the traits are not inherently better or worse than those of their ancestors or other species. Okay, it's not always complex. Number seven, evolution only occurs over long periods of time. Now, even though we say that evolution happens gradually, evolution can occur slightly rapidly in response to changing environmental conditions or selective pressures. What do we mean by that? For example, antibiotic resistance can evolve in bacteria over a relatively short period of time. Let's say a month of taking antibiotics, even though you don't need it, can lead to antibiotic resistance. So that's quite rapid. And last but not the least, evolution implies that all species are equal or equally evolved. Remember, evolution does not imply that all species are equal or equally evolved. Some species may be better adapted to their environment or have evolved more complex traits than others.